Adversaries are relentless, and they're only getting smarter, faster, and more sophisticated. Knowing their game is the only way to beat them. That's why we're here. Learn what it takes to protect against even the most sophisticated attacks. Welcome to the Adversary Universe podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Adversary Universe podcast. I'm Cristian Rodriguez, Field CTO of the Americas, and I'm here with the head of counter adversary operations, Mr. Adam Myers. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Let's talk about catching some bad guys, because on this episode of the Adversary Universe podcast, we are going to visit one of our CHOLLIMA groups that we're tracking. If you're not familiar with the naming convention here at CrowdStrike for the adversaries that we're tracking, we break them down into three categories. There's e-crime groups, there's nation-state groups, and hacktivist groups. But specific to the CHOLLIMA naming convention, that represents a group that we've been tracking out of North Korea, essentially North Korea intelligence, also DPRK intelligence, for those of you familiar with some of the intel reports that we've published in the past. And it's pretty interesting, this most recent report that you sent over. I was reading through it yesterday and this morning, and essentially this report covers, and I don't know if I'm going to describe this well, but it seems like there's this kind of break-off, right? Or this kind of separation.
I'd say an evolution, really.
Evolution, ooh.
You know what the origin of CHOLLIMA, like why we chose CHOLLIMA?
Isn't it their official animal?
It's basically a mythical flying horse. And well, we started looking at, Russia is bear and China is panda, right? So like we always kind of use an animal that's representative of the nation state, oftentimes the official state animal. And when we were looking at North Korea, the official state animal was a magical flying horse, which was just the kind of crazy we were hoping for. And so that became CHOLLIMA. We have fun in CrowdStrike CAO when we do this stuff.
Clearly. The report essentially covers how this evolution of Labyrinth CHOLLIMA, it now really consists of these three, what would you call them, major groups, right? There's Golden CHOLLIMA, Pressure CHOLLIMA, and then naturally Labyrinth CHOLLIMA, right? Being kind of like the first one that we've covered quite extensively over the past.
Well, Silent was the first one we ever had.
Was it Silent? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you go back, right, the real kind of origin of the North Korean stuff, and this report actually kind of highlights this. It started in the early, mid 2000s, right? So 2009 was kind of when we really started seeing activity out of North Korea, and that predates CrowdStrike by a few years, but they were engaged in DDoS attacks, and there was always the financial aspect to it, which is kind of interesting too. We would see that they would target massive multiplayer online games, particularly in places like South Korea and Japan, and they would go in and they would use rats and things like that to steal things in the game, and then they would sell them on the black market for money to fund operations, right?
So like World of Warcraft objects or like League of Legends, stuff like that. Yeah, I got you.
And all kinds of different stuff. And we also saw in the really early days, one of the interesting things was that they were using the same infrastructure that they were using for espionage and for a lot of offensive activity. They did a lot of wiper attacks. They did a lot of denial of service attacks and things like that. But that same infrastructure they were also using to serve up malicious advertising. So they were monetizing it from the very early days of their operations. And I think that, that shows that they've been running a resistance economy for quite some time, because the sanctions, and as, starting in probably 2012, and so we started seeing this maximum pressure strategy against North Korea. And so it really kind of put more pressure on them to fund their own operations. And later, and so, you think like 2009, they were doing some of these kind of early DDoS attacks and wiper attacks and disruptive attacks. They were also monetizing things. And then after the big incident at Sony, which was kind of one of the first times that it became commonly known that North Korea was engaged in this type of activity, shortly after that was their attempt to steal all of that money from the financial infrastructure. And after that, they got cut off from SWIFT, the international banking infrastructure, and that kind of cemented the fact that they really needed to start to generate revenue, and that cryptocurrency was a huge opportunity for them. And as we look at Labyrinth CHOLLIMA, we noted that they were doing some things that were espionage, and we were starting to see a lot more cryptocurrency targeting, which is why we recently actually split Labyrinth CHOLLIMA into 3 groups that consist of Labyrinth CHOLLIMA, Pressure CHOLLIMA, and Golden CHOLLIMA.
And Golden, yeah.
And that's new.
And that is new. And so I know that historically we've been mapping like Labyrinth to the DPRK, which for those of you not familiar, that's the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. But then there's also, as an extension of the DPRK, there's different intelligence groups, right? So there's the GRIB, right? That's the General Recon Information Bureau.
Interestingly, it started in 2009, was the formation of the RGB, the Reconnaissance Bureau General, or General Bureau, however you want to say it.
Yep.
That started in 2009, and that lines up with the first iteration of Labyrinth CHOLLIMA. And we started to see that there were different subgroups. So there was Bureau 121, and there was the 110 Research Center. And so as they started kind of diversifying and building out the RGB, we started seeing new CHOLLIMA groups emerge. And this, gets to one of the earliest things that I think was a huge kind of mistake that the broad industry did. There was a company that I don't even think they're around anymore, but they released this report about what they called Lazarus. And Lazarus was basically all North Korean activity kind of slammed into one kind of name. And that, I think, kind of has created a lot of problems from a threat intel perspective, because from our vantage, we kind of see more granular activity, and we track that a little bit more granularly. So there was kind of always a little bit of a back and forth and confusion when we talked about these different CHOLLIMA groups, and people are like, that's Lazarus. I'm like, yeah, it's all Lazarus.
I see. So Lazarus was this overarching, umbrella for everything related to DPRK. But then in terms of understanding the objectives of these different units, right, that's essentially something that we very surgically separated from that, Lazarus overarching value, if you will, or name. So,
and we've talked about famous CHOLLIMA before, which is part of the Munitions Industry Department per our analysis, and that's part of the, I think, the 75th Bureau. So there are lots of different groups that have different focus, like Velvet and Ricochet CHOLLIMAs have different focus than Labyrinth and Stardust and Silent and some of the other ones. So there's a lot of CHOLLIMAs out there, and as of today, there's 2 more. So,
well, as of today, really?
Well, that's that. Well,
you're saying like this
publicly,
here.
We've never talked about this publicly. Our customers,
yeah, okay.
Wherever, but
so this is why we're releasing the blog as well, I'm sure, right?
Yeah. So for the first probably 5-6 years, maybe even 7 years, the RGB kind of was more monolithic, and then around 2016, right around the time we started seeing that kind of consolidation and focus on generating revenue for the regime, we started to see that's the emergence of the 110 and the 121. And then that kind of went on until about 2021. And in 2021, we started seeing even more groups emerge, like the 325th Bureau and the 63rd Research Center and Office 970. So there was more pieces. And even back in the early 2000s, Kim Jong-un, when his father was still alive, had kind of identified that cyber from an asymmetric capability was something that would be very powerful for North Korea, and something that they started investing in very early on. And I think there's a big misconception that, it's North Korea, it's the hermit kingdom, and they don't have any internet access, and how good could they be with the internet if they don't have access to it? And the reality is that it kind of gives them kind of a moat, if you will, where people aren't going into North Korean internet because you have to connect to it through, different VPNs and things like that they have. And that's where a lot of their cyber capabilities have presumably been forward deployed. We've heard stories of hotels in China and them operating out of places in Thailand and Cambodia and places where they could operate a little bit more freely outside of the North Korean kind of envelope. So there's a lot that goes into, I think, how they operate, what they're doing.
I'm just very curious on the type of infrastructure that they're using, right? Especially given some of the vulnerabilities that we've covered on the telecom side and on the infrastructure side from the major service providers. What are they using, right? And what does that look like in terms of an attack surface?
We don't know. It's fairly opaque, but presumably they have embassies all over the world. Obviously, we don't have diplomatic relations with them officially, like where we would have an embassy in Pyongyang, but they do have embassies elsewhere. And so they can kind of forward deploy some of their cyber assets, and then they can leverage the local internet. They can, set up,
like expand beyond.
Yeah, there's these North Korean restaurants that are popular across Asia, and it's literally staffed by North Koreans. So, presumably they have folks that can operate under diplomatic cover or commercial cover. And do cyber operations.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about their objectives, right? Because you mentioned Labyrinth CHOLLIMA, big on the intel collection side. We've seen them pretty active over the past, over a decade. But Pressure CHOLLIMA and Golden CHOLLIMA, in contrast, they seem to be targeting a lot more cryptocurrency theft as kind of an objective. Very different target verticals and industries, it seems. What do you think is driving that?
Revenue, right? They need money. And North Korea has, as I said, had this resistance economy, and they've been really good at generating illicit revenue for many, many years. They're huge in the counterfeit area. I remember reading an article about, I think it was Secret Service was investigating what they thought was, counterfeit money. And I forgot where I read this, but the agent said that he had, he met a guy and bought a bunch of $100 bills for $50 and sent them down to the lab, and they were like, yeah, these are real. And he was like, all right, well, I'm going to retire then because I'm buying them for 50 cents on the dollar. And they were like, oh, actually, in retrospect, they're not real. And what they were doing was they had these shipping containers, as I understand it, of that they were smuggling in this counterfeit money. And then they were going to Las Vegas casinos, and they would put it into a slot machine. They'd pull the handle once, and then they'd cash it out. So they were effectively laundering counterfeit money through Las Vegas casinos.
Oh, wow.
At least in this story I had read, which I have no reason to doubt. And, Vegas, they don't typically fall for that kind of thing. So it gives you a sense of just how good they are at counterfeiting.
That they even bypass security measures in Vegas, right? Wow.
Yeah. I mean, we've all seen Casino. You know what happens when you mess around in a casino, right? And then you have they're heavily involved in the illicit drugs. So I think presumably now more on the fentanyl, methamphetamine side, but certainly opiates and heroin and things like that in years past. They've been involved in human trafficking and of their own people and using that for kind of forced labor. So they've really done a lot to generate revenue for the regime. In fact, they call it the third floor, the third office, where they have this entire government kind of entity that is established for generating revenue for the regime. And they also have a separate mission to generate revenue for the Kim family, as it's, so they're making quite a bit of money through these different operations. And I think cyber, particularly as cryptocurrency became very popular, the North Koreans were better at it than any tech bro from San Francisco. They were able to target video games that had kind of play to earn. They were able to get access to back when things like what were the pictures, like the
NFTs,
the Monkey Yacht Club thing,
like NFTs, right? NFTs.
Yeah, NFTs. They were involved in that, and with digital organizations, right? So they really understood cryptocurrency, I think, better than anybody, and were able to take advantage of it. So
they're throwing more resources at something that's been very successful. So it's not only that they need money, but they've just been so good at it that now we have very focused teams that are dedicating their interests, right, and their efforts into targeting, like Golden CHOLLIMA, for example, has been targeting small fintech versus like Pressure has been like centralized exchanges. Are we seeing it
associated with two of the biggest cryptocurrency incidents that we've ever seen?
Oh, really?
So it was like over $2 billion associated with some of the things that Pressure has been involved in.
Wow. Okay.
And decentralized currency is ideal for them because sanctions and all of these things have put immense pressure on the fiat currency. So North Korea has a hard time getting kind of traditional fiat currency. So cryptocurrency is ideal for them to generate revenue and to be able to do it in a way that they could avoid sanctions and avoid detection.
Wow. So billions of dollars in this one incident, but collectively, do we have the number?
Yeah.
2 incidents rather. What do you think they've totaled? Their cryptocurrency,
billions of dollars.
Just billions, huh?
I'd say. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like it's a lot of money.
Yeah. It's fascinating because for our listeners, if you heard the previous episode, I think this is going to be previous, or there's a Sean Henry episode that we just published within, a week or two from hearing this. And we talked about the concept of like following the money trail, right? It looks like in this crypto world, it's extremely difficult, right? These ledger systems don't necessarily, they're shrouded in anonymity, and, tracking where the money ends up is a lot more difficult, I'm assuming. So like, how do we know where this ends up and what this money is actually funding?
Well, we can see how they get the money, right? And because incident response engagements and investigations, and you can kind of see into that. It's hard to see where it goes though, because to your point, decentralized currency, you can do things like use mixers to kind of mix where the money goes. So it's hard to kind of track it all. They can jump the chain, meaning if they have it all in Bitcoin, they can convert it to Monero and then to Ethereum or something like that. So the more chains you're jumping, it's hard to follow across different chains. They also will cash it out in a country that might have legalized gambling, and then go take that cryptocurrency and use it to generate fiat currency through laundering it through a casino, which ties back to the kind of the counterfeit story that I gave you before.
Sure.
So, we don't know exactly where that stuff goes. And I've seen reports where, they'll buy, for example, those large crane trucks, right? Those things are really good for construction, but guess what? If you take some of the crane stuff off, now you've got a missile erector. And you can use that for a ICBM or something like that. So they're pretty industrious in how they can kind of take that currency, the cryptocurrency, convert it, and then use it for state activity.
Oh wow! So out of the 3 groups, like which one is the most sophisticated? Right? Is it Labyrinth just because their focus is more on the counterintelligence stuff, or?
I think they're all pretty sophisticated, and it all kind of goes back to a shared tool set, which is, I think, really kind of the interesting piece of this, right? Because one of the things that we have to do is we're looking kind of at the downrange artifacts, right? Looking at the malware, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the tools and techniques that they're using. And so Labyrinth CHOLLIMA early on was kind of defined by this framework that they had called Core DLL. And Core DLL kind of split, and we started seeing Stardust CHOLLIMA using that code, and they morphed it into something that became the 2-pence framework. And that was, 2-pence electric and other 2-pence variants that were associated with Stardust CHOLLIMA. So we actually split Stardust from Labyrinth. And Labyrinth, they took the same Core DLL framework, and in their utility of it, we call it HAWUP. Which is a different framework. And we started seeing that kind of turn into Juice. So there's been lots of reports of like Apple Juice and these different malware families. It also was used as Hoplite is another tool that they created from that same history of that source code from what we could tell from reverse engineering it. So what we've done here is we've kind of said, okay, the Hoplite stuff, which is primarily used for espionage, that's what we keep calling Labyrinth CHOLLIMA. The Juice framework, which has primarily been used for cryptocurrency and fintech, is Golden CHOLLIMA. And then a third version of that, which is called Matanet, kind of merged back with some of the 2-pence framework, and that's what we track as Pressure CHOLLIMA.
Oh, that's it's like a boy band that broke up and everyone's doing their own solo thing now.
It's like genealogy, it's kind of like if you try to figure out your family history, right? Where like the
No, I love the ancestry of the malware families. As you see, like, oh, this the origin of this malware was actually 5 or 6 years ago, and it started with this group, and I love that. But I think it's fascinating how the success of one overarching group has kind of led to this again evolution of these other groups that are becoming a little more focused, right, with their efforts, and they're very successful, it seems.
The success is part of it, but also the maturation of the RGB into what in September was kind of recast as a GRIB, which is kind of the latest iteration of the RGB. So the GRIB is the kind of what they call the General Reconnaissance Information Bureau, was kind of the newer iteration of that. So really think of this as kind of the growth or the maturation of the program. And we could see it on the bureaucratic side, where it goes from RGB to 110 Bureau and splits out all these different ways as they started to achieve success. They were like, oh, let's invest in this and this and this. And so they start growing it out. And then as they're doing that, the downrange effects of that bureaucratic structure are these various malware frameworks that we can kind of link back to the earliest lineage of the core DLL. And so now we're doing almost like malware archaeology.
Yeah,
by
sounds like
going through. Yeah, it's that's why it's so much fun to be in threat intelligence.
No, it really is. It's like cyber anthropology, right? So, I love this. So I'm really curious now, because I know we've been talking and advocating for everyone consuming intelligence, because even if you think you're not a target, you're basically a target. And this is interesting, because it feels like even though Stardust and Pressure and Golden all have kind of like a target verticals or industries that they've been focused on, it seems like there are overarching groups that will target anyone, and there's a lot of opportunistic casualties, if you will, right, based upon anyone being part of an e-crime or rather a crypto campaign, or I was reading even some of the tradecraft that's tied to how they've been getting into certain environments. Some of it is drive-by download, some of it is malware sitting on like WordPress sites and so forth. So who should be concerned the most, right, with this kind of breakout or this evolution into these three groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the number one target is going to be cryptocurrency and fintech. And if you're doing anything in cryptocurrency, fintech, I'd say tangential to that would be online gambling would be another interesting target. And this isn't to say, we're talking about specifically the family of adversaries associated with the RGB and LABYRINTH CHOLLIMA. Not to say that, famous CHOLLIMA, which is by all accounts a separate entity, that's where you see the remote IT workers, and we also see them doing espionage and cryptocurrency targeting. So, it really, depending on what vertical you're in, what geographic region you're in, obviously you're going to have different adversaries that target you. And in the fintech and cryptocurrency side, you're also going to have different CHOLLIMAs that you need to be aware of and tracking.
Speaking of tools and some of the infrastructure that these groups use, there's one interesting point I wanted to highlight. I'm not sure if we can get too deep into this, but and this will be in the report for, I believe, our premium Intel subscribers, right?
And maybe we'll do a blog post, since this is, I think, a general interest topic. We'll do something.
Awesome. Well, LABYRINTH CHOLLIMA specifically, under the infrastructure that they've been using, outside of, again, the compromised WordPress sites or SharePoint sites, you also referenced in this report the Microsoft Graph API for C2 calls. And I thought that was fascinating. And I'd love to dig into, like, what does that actually look like? Are you saying that if they compromise certain infrastructure and infiltrate an organization, they can leverage those APIs as a communication path to their own infrastructure? Is that what that looks like?
Well, they're using the Graph API in many cases for command and control. And why that's useful is that it lets them blend in with kind of legitimate traffic.
Legitimate traffic, yeah.
Yeah, and so if they can use a compromised M365 tenant and take advantage of some of those Graph APIs, they can kind of blend into what, if an organization is using Microsoft Cloud, they can blend right into that.
Yeah, so no one's really hunting for that type of activity, right? Or to your point, it just looks normal, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It looks like, and we see adversaries doing this all the time. They'll create their own infrastructure that kind of looks like it, but if you could actually use compromised infrastructure even better, because then, you know, now you're making everybody look at every connection to Microsoft, which, you know, that could be a lot of connectivity.
Yeah. Or, you know, I say what was more common is, you know, groups that are looking for IOCs that they're being fed, right? Are kind of like outside looking versus seeing like, hey, how is this infrastructure being manipulated, right? Or turned on me. So
yeah,
it's
and
fascinating.
you can't really just write a IDS rule or a you know, next gen SIM query looking for all Microsoft APIs.
Exactly.
Unless you don't use it, then it would be pretty straightforward. But it's pretty difficult to kind of pull out from the hay pile the needles there.
Sure, right, without having some more context also. Right? Love that. You know, again, this is a really good report. We're going to have a blog on this. But what do you think, you know, moving forward, this means for the DPRK, right? It seems like they're maturing, as you mentioned. They're evolving. Are we going to anticipate, you know, just all of a sudden very verticalized groups that are coming out of this overarching, you know, GRIB? You know, what do we look like in the next year?
Right?
Okay.
We see that with China. We see a lot of vertical specific, like specialization.
Exactly.
Right, for telco and for law firms and things like that. Very different kind of perspective when you start looking at North Korea, because one of their primary goals is to generate revenue. And so that's why we see Labyrinth, which may have been real good at the espionage game, and they didn't have enough capability or focus on cryptocurrency and fintech. So somebody probably made a decision, and they were like, okay, like, you keep doing the espionage, and we're going to create these two other teams that are going to do fintech and crypto, because we need to, you know, generate as much revenue as possible.
Oh, fascinating. What does it mean for defenders? Anything that we should start to look out for in some of the tradecraft that we've seen across these three groups?
Well, you know, I think if you look at the geopolitics and the aggressive kind of interdiction of ghost fleet, you know, which we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks, right? U.S. interdicting oil tankers and things like that. The North Koreans have a lot of ghost ships out there. And so if that extends to their ships, that will probably drive even more need to generate revenue through digital mechanisms. And so we may see more and more of this activity, and they're constantly evolving and advancing. So, you know, they're some of the most technically sophisticated adversaries out there. So I think that we'll see an increase in the demand for revenue within the DPRK, and that will result in more and more of these groups actively targeting crypto and fintech and things like that.
Oh, fascinating. Love it. Any closing remarks or anything you want to add before we wrap today's episode? You know, I think there's a whole lot more that we'll be publishing on you know, every one of the CHOLLIMA groups that we've been tracking. You know, as these political tensions increase and change, we'll have obviously a lot more episodes of the podcast. But any closing statements?
Well, I think, you know, this really highlights why threat intelligence is such an important aspect for defending an enterprise, because there's a myriad of threats out there, and you can't defend against every single threat out there. And you probably don't need to, right? Because they're not all targeting you at once. So by keeping an eye on what verticals you're in, what geographic regions you're operating in, what are the geopolitical contexts that are driving some of that threat activity, because, you know, this is a top-down command and control type of, you know, initiative. And we've seen that it's blossomed both on the bureaucratic side within North Korea, and there's going to be downrange effects of that. So it's really important to understand these threats, understand how they're operating, what they're up to, and then making sure that you're out not just aware of it, but hunting for it and looking for, you know, evidence of this activity in your infrastructure before it becomes a problem.
No, love it. Love it. And so a lot more to come on what we've been observing on Golden, Pressure, and Labyrinth CHOLLIMA. This also means, or rather I should say, this doesn't mean that the likes of like famous CHOLLIMA have slowed down, right? We're still seeing these groups out there. And I want to echo your sentiment on, you know, understanding the adversary allows you to defend better against the adversary. I'm hiring for a role out on the West Coast, so if I don't have that role filled by the time you listen to this, check out my LinkedIn post on a tech strategist for our Sunnyvale office and supporting our EBCs. But someone just asked me, what was that?
I was going to say, and also like hit us up on Twitter. Like I
need to make an account. I need to make a next account.
You're not on Twitter?
No, I'm not. I'm
I'm
do that
Adam
today.
Cyber, Adam_Cyber. So definitely hit me up if you have ideas for shows or
I will do that.
Like what we're doing. Not you.
The no. I mean, I'm going to make an account. I'm going to hit you up. Hey,
Adam_Cyber. So definitely hit me up. We'd love to hear more from the folks that are out there. We see who's listening. We see lots of people are listening to it, but we don't really hear too much. So hit us up.
Yeah, we had like 58,000 unique listeners, I think, last year, or something crazy. So thank you so much for the support. But more importantly, feel free to reach out. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. And we're looking forward to some more feedback.
We have the CrowdStrike Government Summit coming up in
that's right,
March, I believe.
I don't know if I'm going to be there for that. Are you going to be there for that?
Oh, you're gonna. I think you're going to be there because I dragged you into it.
Did I really? Did you really? Honestly, that's actually...
I think it's mid-March maybe or early March we're doing it.
All right. Yeah, let me know. Yeah, so shout out to Matt, Kelly, and Kirsten. Thank you so much for all the work you do in the background that our listeners don't actually get to hear or see. If you do want to catch up with Adam and myself, we are going around... the Crowd Tour cities have been officially released. So this year, 2026, is going to be lots of, on the road... keynotes and briefings on AI threats. We are going to have an episode or several episodes on AI threats, on what we're observing from an e-crime and nation-state perspective on the use of AI in very different types of tradecraft. But we will be hitting up cities like Chicago and Denver and Fort Lauderdale and Atlanta, DC, New York. I think we're even hitting the international markets pretty heavily. Trinidad and Tobago. We're hitting up Spain, Barcelona specifically. There's I said that with conviction. Anyways, it's going to be a fantastic year. Check out our crowd tour dates in the show notes. And if you're in town, stop by and see us, and we'll have some great conversations. So looking forward to it.
And some cool swag as always.
This is the Adversary Universe podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Adam, I'll see you later.
See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to our podcast and head over to crowdstrike.com/adversaries to learn more about the many bad guys we track. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Adversary Universe podcast.